Three friends are Jessica, Bob, and Jake go camping in the deep forest to spend the night around a campfire. The forest is known for its gloomy reputation. Locals say that people who went there sometimes did not return, but my friends don't believe in these stories and decide to check it out for themselves. They find a suitable place to camp. They light a bonfire and start chatting merrily. Night falls quickly, and the forest is plunged into complete silence. Suddenly, Jessica notices that it has become too quiet. No sound of birds, no rustle of wind, just the crackle of the campfire. She tells her friends about it, but they just laugh, considering her words to be a manifestation of fear. And then they hear it, a low, barely audible whisper. It's coming from somewhere deep in the forest. At first they think it's the wind, but the whispers are getting clearer. It sounds like someone is calling them by their first names. Bob, the bravest of the three, decides to check out what's going on. He takes the lantern and walks away to where the whispers are coming from. Jessica and Jake stay by the campfire, but the whispers get louder, and now they hear their names too. Jessica persuades Jake to go after Bob, so as not to be alone at the camp. They walk along the path, lighting the way with lanterns. The whispers are getting closer, but they can't figure out where it's coming from. Suddenly, they find Bob's flashlight lying on the ground, but Bob himself is nowhere to be found. Jessica begins to panic, and Jake tries to calm her down, saying that Bob may have just been joking and hiding. But the whispers are getting louder, and now they're right behind them.
Jessica, Jake.
Turning around, they see a figure in the dark. It's Bob, but he's standing motionless, with his head down. Jessica calls him, but he doesn't answer. Jake comes closer and touches his shoulder, but Bob abruptly raises his head. His eyes are empty, and his face is distorted by a creepy smile. He begins to whisper something incomprehensible, and his voice sounds as if it is not he who is speaking, but someone else. Jessica screams and runs away, leaving Jake with Bob. She runs back to the camp, but the bonfire has already gone out, and there is an impenetrable darkness around. The whispers are now coming from all sides, and she realizes that the forest seems to have come to life. Suddenly, another figure appears in front of her. It's Jake, but his face is the same as Bob's, empty eyes and a creepy smile. Jessica tries to run away, but her feet seem rooted to the ground. The whispering becomes deafening, and she begins to distinguish the words, "Stay with us, you're one of us now." The last thing she sees are the figures of Bob and Jake, who are slowly approaching her, holding out their arms. The next morning, a local resident finds a camp of friends. The bonfire had long since gone out, and things were scattered. But the guys themselves are nowhere to be found. Only in the air, among the trees, sometimes you can hear a quiet whisper calling new names. Lara was an ordinary girl who adored antiques. One day, she and her mother went to an antique store, where an unusual doll attracted her attention. It was a porcelain doll with long brown hair, an antique dress, and eyes that seemed to alive. The seller said that the doll was very old and unique, but warned, "You need to be careful with it." Lara just smiled, ignoring the words. The doll was bought, and Lara put it on a shelf in her room. At first everything was fine, but already on the first night something went wrong. Lara woke up to a strange sound, as if someone was whispering her name. She turned on the light, but there was no one in the room. Only the doll was sitting on the shelf, looking directly at her. The next day, Lara noticed that the doll had changed position. It was turned the other way, although the girl clearly remembered that she had left it facing the bed. Mom must have accidentally touched her, Lara thought, but the feeling of anxiety did not leave her. It was getting weirder every day. The doll appeared in different parts of the room, although no one touched it. One day, Lara found her sitting on her desk, with a small note in her hands. The note said. The girl was scared, but decided that it was someone's joke. That night, she heard the whispers again. It was louder this time. "Lara, Lara," the voice sounded right by her bed. She abruptly turned on the light and saw that the doll was sitting on the floor, right at her feet. Her eyes seemed to be looking straight into her soul. Lara screamed, and Mom ran into the room. The girl told her everything, but her mother just waved her off. "You're just overworked. It's just a doll." But Lara knew that wasn't the case. The next day, she decided to get rid of the doll. She took it out into the garden and buried it deep in the ground. "It's all over now," she thought, but at night it all happened again. The whispering grew louder, and a new note appeared on her desk. "Why did you leave me?" Terrified, Lara ran into the garden to check if the doll was still there, but the pit was empty. The doll returned to her room, sitting on the bed with another note, "You're mine now." The next morning, Lara disappeared. Her parents only found the doll sitting on the bed. Her eyes were now an exact replica of Lara's. Alice was glad to move. After a long search, she finally found an apartment that was suitable for her price. Spacious, with high ceilings, in an old house in the city centre. The only thing that bothered her were the strange stains on the bedroom walls. They resembled the outline of a human figure, as if someone was standing there, but his silhouette remained forever. The landlady, an elderly woman, waved her hand when Alice asked about it. "It's just traces of old paint," she said. "The house is old, the walls too." Don't pay any attention. Alice decided not to dwell on it. She moved in, put her things away, and began to settle in. But on the very first night, something went wrong. Lying in bed, she noticed that the shadow on the wall looked strange. She was too clear, too human-like. Alice tried to convince herself that it was just a trick of the light. She turned off the night light, but the shadow remained. She seemed to be moving, even though there wasn't the slightest movement in the room. Alice turned on the light, and the shadow disappeared. "I guess it was just my imagination," she thought, and fell asleep. The next day, Alice decided to talk to the neighbours. She knocked on the door opposite, and an old woman opened it. Hearing about the shadow, the woman turned pale. "You're not the first to notice this," she said. "A man used to live in your apartment. He was lonely, strange. No one talked to him. They say he committed suicide right in the room where you sleep. His body was found a few days later, and a shadow remained on the wall. No one was able to get her out. Everyone who lived there after him complained about strange things. But you don't believe in such nonsense, do you?" Alice returned home completely terrified. She decided that she would not stay in this apartment. But before she left, she needed to pack her things. In the evening, when she was putting clothes in a suitcase, the light in the apartment began to blink. Suddenly, the lamp went out, and the room was plunged into darkness. The shadow on the wall began to move. She was no longer just a blur. It was a figure that was slowly sliding down from the wall and approaching Alice. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone. The shadow stretched out its long, distorted arms to her. Alice retreated to the door, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. The shadow was already very close. She whispered, "You're not leaving. You're mine now." The next morning, the neighbours noticed that the door to Alice's apartment was ajar. There was no one inside. Only a new shadow appeared on the bedroom wall. Now there were two of them.